This episode is sponsored by FusionAuth.
I've given so much grief to the AWS Managed NAT Gateway over the last few years that if I were to pass all of that grief through one of the gateways themselves, it would bankrupt my company. You guys paid for all this! It occurred to me that while I've talked about my problems with the service in bits and pieces all over the place, such as on Twitter and incoherently over drinks in Seattle, I've never sat down and laid out my problems with it in one single place, so it's definitely time to fix that. Let's start at the beginning. When you set up a subnet inside of an AWS Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC, you have the option to route its traffic to an internet gateway. If you do that, it's what's known as a public subnet. If you don't, it's known as a private subnet. Nodes in a private subnet might still need to talk to things outside of that specific network. To allow this, you used to have to build and run your own network address translation, or NAT, instances. This was a colossal pain in the butt. It required a lot of nuanced configuration to an EC2 instance that you had to run, and those instances were effectively single points of failure for an entire subnet. Using auto-scaling groups or load balancers to make them more available was obnoxious and finicky. Then, in 2015, AWS launched a Managed NAT Gateway service, and it was awesome. Suddenly, you didn't have to jump through all of these hoops to run something delicate and complicated yourself. You clicked a button in the console with ClickOps, or you added a line of CloudFormation, and it just worked. So we quickly entered a place where the only people who ran their own NAT instances themselves were either fossils from an earlier time or folks with very specific needs. But there was a problem. Every application needs authentication, presumably, but just like deciding to buy a car rather than create your own, there are some things where it's safer not to build it yourself from spare parts. Auth is one of them. In fact, I dare say that doing that with Auth would be awful. FusionAuth is authentication built for developers by developers. They know how to put developers in the driver's seat, but also how to keep them out of the pilot's seat, because everyone flying their own helicopter is both insane and terrifying. What's cool about FusionAuth is that you can host it yourself anywhere you want, or if you're not into that, they will host it for you in a private, dedicated instance in the cloud instead of a shared service. They have a free version that has no limit on volume, and thousands of applications depend on it today. They know Auth, they're not zeros, if you know what I'm putting down. So before you build it or get stuck with an expensive alternative, check them out at snark.cloud/fusion. Check them out at snark.cloud/FusionAuth. They're not awful. The Managed NAT Gateway charges a fee for every hour that it's running. That's 4.5 cents per hour in the Tier 1 regions. For large or enterprise customers, that's very comfortably in nobody cares territory. The trouble with this is an awful lot of tutorials on the internet set up private subnets as a matter of course, and it's not immediately obvious that a Managed NAT Gateway is included. Further, there is no free tier for this service. So therefore, you have a student learner firing up an account to play around with a free tier and suddenly getting slapped with a surprise fee when the monthly bill hits. You guys paid for all this! It's bad business, and it leaves a very sour taste of AWS when that's your first encounter with its billing system. Now, if this were its only billing dimension, I would be annoyed, but I would have gotten over it years ago. This is annoying, but it fits into my larger "please fix the AWS free tier" campaign. The bigger problem is that AWS also charges 4.5 cents per gigabyte passed through the gateway as a data processing fee that's completely separate from any data transfer fees assessed, and that's where the whole thing melts down. Recall that in US East 1 or any other Tier 1 region, moving data between availability zones within a region, as well as between some other regions, costs at minimum 2 cents per gigabyte. Sending that data to the internet costs 9 cents per gigabyte. Storing that data in S3 for a month costs 2.3 cents per gigabyte. Sending that data to a satellite in orbit via ground station costs, I have no idea how much because AWS ghosted me when I asked. I just think it's incredibly nifty that that's a real thing you can do and not something out of a sci-fi novel, but I digress. You guys paid for all this! But the Managed NAT Gateway data processing fee remains fixed at 4.5 cents with no volume-based price breaks. And it drives me up a wall just because it's so egregious once you hit non-trivial data transfer volumes. When I'm looking at a client's AWS bill and see significant Managed NAT Gateway data processing fees, I get a sinking feeling in my gut because I know that they're not going to be happy with what I've found. There are a few ways that conversation plays out, and none of them are pleasant. The customer invariably gets a harsh introduction to the facts of life as they discover just how thoroughly they're being fleeced. We're putting a petabyte of data through that thing in a month, but you don't understand. We've got to get that data to and from S3. Yeah, I get it. I'm not suggesting that you change your data flow. But if you add a completely free S3 gateway endpoint to your private subnet, suddenly that petabyte of traffic to and from S3 stops costing you $45,000 a month and becomes absolutely free. For some godforsaken reason, this is not enabled by default. Well, we need to move a petabyte a month to and from the internet, and we can't move the EC2 instances doing that into a public subnet because of compliance. Look, I am not one to argue with compliance requirements, I assure you. But in a scenario like this, setting up your own managed NAT instances and running them is a clear win. Yes, it's finicky and annoying. Yes, it increases your team's operational toil. But how much does it cost you to put that responsibility onto an existing team or hire a third-party consulting company that is not us, whose sole job is to run a set of NAT instances for you? If the answer is less than $495,000 a year, and it had damn well better be, then you're coming out ahead here. Well, wait, you're telling me that this one change just paid for our entire consulting engagement with you folks? Yes, many times over, and I promise this brings me no joy whatsoever. This is a great example of why we only ever charge a fixed fee for our projects. Can you imagine how royally pissed off a client would be at having to pay a percentage of their Managed NAT Gateway charges to us via some sort of ridiculous, we'll charge you a percentage of the savings cost model? They'd be right to be upset because this isn't high value undifferentiated work. It's pointing out a stick that AWS uses to smack an awful lot of customers. My issue is not that the service is bad. Far from it. This is exactly what I want AWS to be building. Services that reduce toil and remove undifferentiated heavy lifting that every company has to do themselves. Running your own NAT instances is a terrible practice that I strive to avoid. It's solving a global problem locally, and if we've got to do that, why are we even using cloud providers in the first place? Recently, NAT gateways also became able to translate between IPv4 and IPv6. The service is good. No, my issue here is solely around the pricing of the service at both ends of the customer spectrum. In isolation, a Managed NAT Gateway doesn't do anything. I can't spin up a Managed NAT Gateway to serve web traffic or mine Bitcoin or even misuse it as a database, despite my best attempts. If you gave me a magic wand, I would either make the service entirely free or I would offer a generous free tier and wipe the data processing fees entirely. All in on red. Yeah, it's Adam. Listen, we need to raise the price on that new machine learning service we're launching at reInvent by a lot. I mean a lot. More than that. Add 2 pricing dimensions, I don't care. I'm not the doctor, Matt.